All right, I think I'm going to get this started. Seems about the right time to do it. Welcome everybody to SeaRUG for 2018. I'm going to try something a little bit new. Since I'm presenting after the opening slides, I decided to get a lav mic so I can walk around a little bit, and now I can't see what the screen is saying. Chris, we really need that presenter display over here. You bump that up on the priority list. Anyway, welcome. Thank you everybody for joining us. We're excited to kick off SeaRUG another year, and it looks like it's going to be a nicely attended one. So thank you everybody for taking some time out of this very cold day to come have some wonderful lunch with us. I'm David Diarza, president of the board for SeaRUG, and I'm also presenting, or sponsoring today, not presenting, with Builderbox. So I'm CEO of Builderbox, and I'll tell you what that's all about in a minute. Let's see if this works. Yep. So today's agenda, we're enjoying some nice lunch. I'll say a few words here, and I'll tell you SeaRUG, make a few announcements, then I'll tell you a little bit about my company and get the heck out of the way, because what you really want to hear is Salla tell you about augmented reality, virtual reality, extended reality, et cetera, and how to get there from Revit. So big thank you to the sponsors. You'll see that there's some glaring omissions. We usually have a much longer list over here. These guys are you. And by you, I mean the members of the board. Get your forms in, support anybody in this group if you think your company would benefit from having name exposure, or if you just believe that what we're doing is valuable to you. That's a $350 sponsorship to get yourself up there. We've typically kept the names of everybody over there, but there were some that were a few years old, so I decided I'm going to actually nudge people into getting their forms in. And if you don't know what form I'm talking about and you're interested, come see me or one of us on the board, and let's get your name up there. Of course, our executive partners, mostly the VARs in town, we really thank you. You're really the group that has kept this going over the years, and we've got a really good run over the last many, many years. And that are premier partners, people like myself and other vendors and other solutions that have products that are in the periphery of Revit. So thank you to all the sponsors. That's how you get this wonderful lunch and this wonderful venue without having to have any membership fees or anything. And while I'm in the subject of thank yous, thank you to the board members. A lot of you are here today. We kind of think that this is a little bit on autopilot and it's really not that difficult to do anymore, but the reality is that there's always some issues and we're always evolving. This year, at the beginning of the year, we had a board meeting where we started tackling the issue of this was born as a Revit 101, kind of a let's get people onto Revit, because Revit is in its infancy, and we're all learning it at the same time. Well, you can no longer say that about Revit. Anybody that tells you Revit or BIM or anything like that, it's in its infancy, hasn't been awake for the last decade and a half. This is a mature product that if you're not working with, chances are you're not doing your work very well. You're probably wasting a lot of time. You're negating the last decade and a half of technological evolution has happened. So as a group, we need to evolve. We can't have Revit 101 presentations anymore, and that's a little bit of a challenge sometimes. So thank you to all these good folks that we put our brains together and we try to come up with a program that works for you, try to plan out the year, try to come up with policies that'll give you good, valuable presentation content. A few upcoming events. I think I have these in chronological order. There's tomorrow a webinar on how to choose construction software that you will actually use, and our very own Lana Gockenauer is, I believe, the author of that. And I don't have a URL for that in the slide that you sent me. Okay, if you go to assemble.com, you will see the information for that. Should be pretty fascinating. Next week, AGC convention, if anybody's going in New Orleans, I will be there, booth 400, come see me. And get some drinks, enjoy New Orleans, it'll be fun. Let's see, what else? A little bit later, in a few weeks, there is a conference about empowering women's and leadership roles in non-traditional industries. And of course, construction is heavily represented at this. So this should be a pretty good event. It's local, it's a fairly low registration fee. I think that it's a very important cause to be involved with, very timely and definitely a really good outlet for a lot of people that think, hey, there's a lot of industries out there that can really benefit from more women being in them. So I'll be at this one too. Obviously not a woman, but I'm sponsoring and exhibiting. So it's not limited to women, guys. You can go. And last but not least for, I think, this slideshow is the UW CERC conference is happening in a few weeks. I don't know if you've ever been to this one, but this one is really cool. Carrie Dosick, who's a professor of construction management, PhD, over at the UW, is doing a keynote, and there's somebody else doing a keynote that I can't remember. The program's online, is really good, and usually represented well by companies like Skanska and other large construction companies in town. And I'll be there, which is always it's always a plus. Speaking of me, I'll kind of jump to my presentation here and give you guys about maybe 5-8 minutes or so, and then I'll turn it over to Salla, kind of explain to you what the heck Builderbox is since I'm sponsoring today. Before I do that, just real quick, don't run off in the middle of the presentation. We have a couple of Amazon gift cards to give away. If you are SVP'd, your name is in the reusable, recyclable Walgreens bag, and we'll pick a name out of the bag and give you a little gift. Let me switch over to my other presentation here. So, what the heck is Builderbox? Why on earth would I leave a perfectly good job at a local general contractor and go start a software company and complicate my life? Well, part is because I don't like working for people. I don't like having to explain to people why it is that I'm doing what I'm doing. So working for myself made a lot of sense. Builderbox really is a smarter way to manage construction projects. Don't be afraid of the slides. I pilfered this from another presentation. Most of you guys know this. I'm going to run through this very quick, and then against my better judgment, I'm going to try to do a live software demo for a couple of minutes. Won't bore you for very long. But essentially, anybody in this room probably is aware of the fact that, the construction industry, architecture, engineering, construction, anything related to construction, not just building of buildings, but everybody in this room is affected by this. 13% of global GDP. That's a really big industry. Probably the largest industry globally. We use the most resources, create the most waste, all that good stuff, right? Everybody knows that. And yet, construction productivity has been stagnant, gone up about 1% globally, actually gone down in the US. So that's a pretty big problem. It's a $1.6 trillion a year problem. So I said, I want a piece of that. Let me see if we can solve some of it. So has a lot of other people. This has garnered a lot of interest lately. I'm not the only one saying it. You guys have probably seen a lot of these reports. World Economic Forum, the UK government mandates BIM on public projects, for crying out loud. I mean, it's, people have to do better, and there's global pressure to do it, even if we don't feel as much of it here in the US. Believe it or not, we have better market penetration in other places. But Salla knows all about this. I mean, Scandinavian countries have been in the forefront of this for a long time. So what are the reasons for this? Well, our contractual relationships are really a big part of that. We sign contracts that make us go to war with one another, and we have to admit that, and we have to work within those parameters. Not everybody's going to do IPD. That doesn't work for everybody, and that's okay. This is the problem that I'm trying to address. Construction is one of the least digitized industries worldwide. In the US, we're actually declining in productivity because of this. There's all kinds of metrics that I could show you, and all kinds of reports to back this stuff up. But why are we not digitizing processes? I mean, computers can count faster than you and I. That's all they can do. But that means you can make them automate stuff. And the old garbage in, garbage out thing still rings true, right? But it's really not that difficult. I mean, who here has one of these? Does everybody have one of these? Don't you do pretty amazing stuff on your digital life with these? And why do you get to work on Monday morning and have a bunch of attachments to emails? So the other aspect to the construction industry that's tough is that it's localized. We have a hole in the ground. We can't outsource that. We also can't readily take the lessons learned from somebody that dug a hole in the ground in London and apply them here. You can go to a conference in London and hear them present, but you can't take that team and bring it here. So that's a big problem, but again, technology can help. What we really need is a better way to manage complex information. Technology can, of course, help. We all know it. Anybody that's used Pinterest to save their favorite websites knows that technology can help with that problem. We need to enable better collaboration within those contractual relationships that we know we have. But again, Computers know who you are based on your login. They can then be defined to control access to one thing or to another based on who you are. And the really big push in the industry is towards automation. I was just talking to Lloyd earlier about, they're trying to cut sheet metal directly from Revit models. And they will get there. That will happen. But if you're going to do that, that model better be right. That's really the problem. The problem has never been cutting sheet metal from a 3D description. That exists. But knowing that you have the right information, it's not any easier than knowing that the set of plans you have in front of you is the latest and greatest version. That's always been a problem. So I'm going to just fly through these because I actually rather show you live this stuff, but I'll probably just focus on this kind of stuff because I really like our readiness index. I want to show you what that's all about. Of course, it's mobile. We're a dynamic web app, means you don't have to download an app. It works Android, Windows Phone if you're, unlucky enough to have one of those. Of course, iPhone, any device, any platform, anywhere, regardless. You log in, you have the latest one, nothing to download or update. And then this is the part that Jesse probably won't like. My biggest challenge deploying technology on a project when I was at my previous life was not that it was expensive, is that I never could tell what the price was until there was a budget, because that was one of the things that the vendors would ask me. Well, what is the budget of the project? How many people? How long is the duration? By the time I know those things, I cannot add a $50,000 line item to a budget. Sorry, cannot do it. Even I can't add a $5,000 line item to the budget. Sorry, cannot do it. So price transparency is extremely important. The other thing is being able to forecast. I don't know how many plumbers my plumbing subcontractor is going to bring to the job. I know how many people I have, and I know how many people I'm likely to hire over the next year. So anybody that's not on your email domain is absolutely free and unlimited, and with roles, you can set them up to do anything you want them to do. There's no limitation. So those things are very, very important. So what's our advantage? Huge, first and foremost, what I just talked about. Pricing, transparency. We're a people-first platform. I hope to show you a little bit of that when I show you the platform, and I'll just show you a couple of very quick things. Because of the pricing transparency, you can scale your team. If you start a project with 3 people and you need 45, like Lloyd, that project that you're on, I think those guys have 4 licenses. So they're paying us something like $150 a month. They've got 80-some people on the project day in, day out that are collaborators. So that's scaled very naturally without them having to come buy anything new from us. When you have new technology, regardless of whether it's something like Builderbox or project management or CA or anything else like that, you need to ask yourself, what can I enable with this? Am I going to just put a digital layer on top of my old status quo, or am I going to take advantage of these things and actually be more productive? I think you should do that. We do that really well. We also realize that we are part of a software ecosystem, so we've got REST APIs that integrate into just about anything. I was just telling Jesse, in the next couple of months, we've got a project going on with Autodesk, and I can't give a lot of details yet, not because it's secret, but because we haven't really defined what it is. But Autodesk really badly wants us to integrate into some of their ecosystem, and we've got, it's on the schedule for March to start doing that. So we'll be part of that ecosystem. You'll be able to start something in one platform, push it to another, be in the model. And lastly, unlike some of our competition, we're very customizable, modular. If all you really care about is CA and you want to track meeting minutes and RFIs, and you want to have a one-push, one-click archive of the projects you can give to the owner at the end of the day, and you're running CA on a project, perfect. You just enable that. If you are running supply chain management, you turn those things on. If you don't care about financials because you have a separate accounting piece, you turn those modules off. They don't even show up. So that's really, really nice. We've got a client that is building a pretty large project. They're starting another project next door. They've decided they don't need more managers and PEs on that project next door. The schedules stagger in such a way that with our technology, they're able to basically say, we're not hiring more people to work on this. Just back of the napkin, that's about the savings in a year just on salaries. I'm not even talking about improvements in efficiency. I'm talking about people you don't need on the site anymore. So let me get a couple of minutes here to show you a couple of things in the platform to validate some of what I said in terms of people first and stuff like that, and then we'll turn it over to Salla. So by people first, I mean people build buildings. Drawings don't build buildings. Models don't build buildings. People do. So this needs to be a collaborative platform. So we've got, I will not lie, there was a lot of influence when we designed this from the way that you consume data and social media. Quite frankly, works really, really well. It's just that social media doesn't have the controls over users and permissions that needs to have to be a good project management tool. But if you mention somebody and they get a notification, if you hashtag something and it becomes searchable, that's a very powerful concept. If you use Slack, for example, you know that. It's just that Slack is just messaging, right? So one of the things that we've done is we have made it so that any document within the system, and I say document, but I don't really like saying document because these things are not documents, these things are data points. So here's, for example, an RFI. I have an entire conversation thread where I can involve anybody else that I want in here. So this is not going to be the answer to this RFI, but it's going to be the context to why the RFI gets answered in this way, and that gets captured with this RFI. It will always be there. So if later on down the road I am in the model and I'm not too sure about what was happening with these, hey, there's some footings here that I know we have some inconsistencies, let me take a look at its links. I can directly go from the Navisworks model into the live RFI, not a PDF of a one point in time snapshot of what that RFI was, but what is that RFI live right now? Well, I can see it's been answered. I can see all the conversations about it. I can see the response. Well, there's a footing schedule. Go by that. There it is. It's attached. So being a database means that we can do stuff like that live. And of course, we are very much URL-based because it's a web platform, so I can embed it into anything. And sorry, I'm going to show Bluebeam instead of Teams, but you could do this with any product. So you've got your Bluebeam session. You create a bunch of hyperlinks. Well, maybe you've got a design issue. You have a stair revision to deal with. You click into it. These hyperlinks are persistent, so you can just simply click into it, and you've got a whole group about this stair revision. Any communication, any document about the stair, you can keep them in there. You can always go find that, hyperlink it into anything. And because it is a database, you can do things like relate anything in the system to something else. So let me just show you finally here our schedule module. I'm going to my master project plan. Now we're not trying to replace P6. Actually, let me go into this guy. Switch projects here. Very project specific. You can have different settings, different behaviors across different projects. So lots of control there. Anything in the system can be related to anything else. So if you've got a punch list or what we call a job walk, which could be virtual, could be a model walk, it could be a VR walk, or it could be a walk of the drawings. It's a job walk. It can be something that gets tied later on to an RFI, for instance. It becomes an RFI. Or if I have a task, I can be doing my pre-task plan or my look-aheads and come in here and say, well, what's my readiness index on these things? Well, look at that. I've got a bunch of items that this task is dependent on that are not done yet. Only 17% of them are done. Let's see, do I have my workspace? Yeah, workspace is ready. We've done our safety preparations. Material is available. Equipment is available. My crew is available. But you know what? I've got a couple of job walks. So let's go take a look at those. There's a job walk that's not complete. So before I go pour those foundations, I better come in here and look at this whole thread of information and find out, well, we have an issue. Have we fixed this? Before we go pour that, have we fixed this? Is that going to stop me from pouring? I don't know. That's a determination that you can make if you have that information. But I can tell you that I've been in way too many job sites looking at a footing that somebody in a meeting is saying, well, we got to look at that, and somebody sends a picture into the coordination call going, sorry guys, we poured that today. It happens constantly. And that's the kind of stuff that leads to that lack of productivity that costs $1.6 trillion a year in this industry. So we thought that we would build this for general contractors because that's the lens that I look at the world through when we created this. We've got owners on the platform that are really liking it. We've got architects on the platform that are speccing out that this is the CA platform. Because of the pricing, it means you can turn a bunch of this stuff off and not care about supply chain, not care about schedule, and just use it for your own. I mean, heck, I've been a VDC guy for nearly 25 years. It was 1994, the first time that I modeled an entire building with everything in it, talking about flanges and everything else. So it's a little bit strange that I get so excited about meeting minutes. The fact that you can create meeting minutes where I can push action items. Go ahead, actually edit this. I can turn an action item from a meeting minutes into a task that I can check back on and I can actually keep people accountable on is pretty nice. Let's take a look here. If I go to add an action item, David is supposed to do that. Well, I can keep this in the meeting minutes and next week we'll talk about it, or I can promote it to be a task. And the second I do that, that guy is going to be in here. And now I can add a bunch of detail. If I say that I'm going to get this done by the 28th, the system tracks that I said that. If I get cute and I say I'm not going to be able to meet that, I'm just going to change that to the second just because I can. It's going to say that I have done that. Accountability. So anyway, thank you for indulging me. That's what I've been up to. That's what we're working on at Builderbox.io. And because this is not a Revit-specific application, even though we, through URLs, can integrate into Revit workflow really, really nicely, and we're actually working on a plugin, said, well, I can't really talk to you for an entire hour about Builderbox. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask somebody that I know and respect to come talk to you about something you might actually care a little bit more about. So Salla Palos of Sellen is going to blow our minds with what is possible with AR, VR, XR, et cetera, et cetera. Salla?
Thank you.
It's all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So thank you for having me here. I come from Finland, so for us, public speaking is considered a punishment. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, please help me out. I might have difficulty pronouncing some terms, or you might think that, okay, she's completely lost. But a little bit about my background. So I work for Sellen Construction right now. And I basically lead their XR development, some of the new technologies development and adapting to the new technologies that our industry is getting from gaming industry or from the IT industry. I moved to Seattle and United States 2.5 years ago, and before that I lived in Finland. And I was a researcher for almost 15 years, doing project management for European Union funded projects. And I was one of the first BIM pioneers in Finland when we started adapting building information model solutions from the theory into design and construction. So I basically consulted companies like Skanska, that you know is also here in the United States, but a lot of big European companies. I worked with multiple European Union countries. I speak about countries because their teams were public and private companies or cities and such. I've done projects for urbanization in China and retrofitting of neighborhoods in Russia, etc. So everything that was BIM related, I've probably done something to it. So that's basically my background and how I got into the career track that I'm currently in. Let's check out the agenda a little bit today. So I'm thinking that we are going to cover a little bit about the industry challenge that we are facing today, moving from Industry 1.0, which is the Industrial Revolution 1 that happened when steam was discovered and industry started developing based on that. Construction industry has basically stopped developing back then. We haven't really gone to assembly lines and produced in mass production. We are using computers, but we are not really IT technology-based industry. And now I'd like to leap into the industry revolution 4.0, which is the artificial intelligence, and that's where Revit and the tools that Revit is able to do and Revit as a platform can enable. I'm interested in starting a discussion on that. I'm going to cover a little bit about the basics about what are the best Revit practices so that you are able to prepare for the XR. XR is augmented reality or virtual reality or augmented reality, augmented virtuality, and mixed reality. So there are a lot of different terms, and I'm not even throwing in cinematic reality or simulated reality that I'm now currently looking into. We are going to be looking into how you can get your content from Revit to XR. That is a simple process. And then I'm going to discuss a little bit about the common tools that are now available for everyone and what I've been using to create the XR experiences at Sellen. And at the end, I'm going to show a little video that we made with Umbra when we were developing one of their versions for the Umbra 3D composite and prism. So it's a pretty cool example about augmented reality. So, to our industry challenge. I like to kind of divide the industry challenge into 3 groups: people, business, and technology. And for people, we all know that there is the global megatrend of urbanization, and we are experiencing that here in Seattle. Even though we are still a fairly small city, but we are now developing really, really big mega projects right here in the downtown of Seattle, creating both housing and commercial space, office spaces for people. So we are the end users, we are also the designers and the creators of these environments. So it's not, it's really important to understand that what we are creating is for ourselves, and it's for someone who has an opinion on the space. People have emotions. You have feelings about what the space feels like when you enter it. Do you feel safe? Do you hate it? Do you like it? The architect that is designing this doesn't necessarily know based on the client just commissioning that I want to have a big, big office space downtown Seattle. Here's your assignment. They don't know what the end users need. And that's why the XR tools are really good way to start communicating at early on with your end users and with your investors and your extended group, team of other designers and engineers and your general contractor and the general contractor's subcontractors. I mentioned the investors and the end users. So people who don't necessarily understand the documents, the 2D documents, or even the Revit models in the same way that you do, because you are professionals and you're used to using Revit as a tool every day. Extending Revit's capabilities into XR allows people to experience your design. And that way, when they are making decisions based on your design, they are basing their decisions based on facts. They are basing their decisions on product data that you can extract from your Revit model and show in the XR environment, and they can base their decisions based on how they feel about the space. They can walk around and experience the entire building. They can go to spaces that they wouldn't access if it was not for a VR or XR environment. So it's a really good way of leveraging what you're doing with Revit. One of the problems that our industry currently also has is that we are a really traditional industry, and we are not really attracting young talent as our great generations are now transferring and retiring. So there's a huge knowledge gap. So XR is a good way for you guys to start mentoring those who are now entering the job market, and adapting to the new tools that we now have with the new technologies is a little bit more sexy than showing them that, hey, back in the day when we started working, we were using the same tools as people who basically just moved out from a cave. So nobody gets excited about drawing with a pen and paper, but they might get excited about, hey, I can experience these things. It's kind of like being in a game, and it basically is. But it's not a toy, it's a tool. And it's also a tool for us. We understand better what we are trying to accomplish. So I mentioned the soft values about how a space feels and how a project can be communicated better and comprehended better by using the XR tools. And it is true. When I started using the XR tools and had my first experience with the VR environment, I created an environment where I was at one of the tall buildings that we are seeing here, the Amazon headquarter buildings. I think I went to maybe level 32 or something, and I went to the slab edge, and I was looking down because I created the city environment in that experience, and it actually felt really awkward to be at the really edge of the slab, and I didn't feel comfortable stepping over it. So there is a really good use case about how you can train your project teams and have people prepare before going out to the real world what they need to be looking after, and you can see how they react to places and spaces. If you were sending out a person to a confined space, you want to know beforehand if they are able to handle it. Or if you send out a crew to install something, then it's good to know beforehand if someone says that, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do this just by myself, I need at least 2 more people to assist me. So there's a direct application where you can save both time and money and keep people safe. So about business. So we are developing and building for companies that are international. Construction industry might be local, but the business is global. And the people who are investing into these buildings, they see these buildings as business as a service. It's a specific term for them to do business with their investment, and they are renting out the spaces, and they have the end users, and that's how they make some of their income. So being able to communicate to them what their final product is going to look like, they are more confident in investing in their project, and they feel more confident being your partner in that project. And using Revit allows you to make sure that the data that you are providing for your customer who is making their decisions not only based on how good the project looks like, they are able to extract that quality data into their own systems and use that data over and over again. So instead of talking about interoperable systems, I want you to start thinking and talking about transoperable systems. So exchanging real-time data across cloud platforms and using data that you're refining and using and providing for others, and doing it with really high-quality data. So what you're providing is accurate, it's absolutely correct, and is reliable. And with Revit, you're also able to model things to the 3D geometry accuracy level. So in Europe, 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of talk about the clash detection that we are still doing a lot here in the United States. In Europe, they don't really talk about clash detection anymore because they basically expect that the models that come out at the end of the design process are clash-free. So they're not pushing that clash detection to the general contractor and expecting them to kind of do the markings and provide them feedback. It's up to the design or engineering author to make sure that what they are building or what they are modeling is accurate, is absolute, and it's the virtual representation of the real world. And I see that's something that really needs to be discussed also here in the United States, that you're not only producing the 2D documents, you're producing BIM. Sorry, I'm a little sassy and really direct. Yeah, but I like to kind of create a little bit of discussion, because I don't want to be seeing the same problems every day over and over again. It just creates more frustration. So reliable data, reliable geometry. And there you have a good business for you and for your clients. Technology was the third keyword that I used, and I already mentioned the Industrial Revolution 4.0. And construction industry now, we are living that Industrial Revolution 4.0, even though if we want to remain the traditional, outdated industry, we can't be. Other industries are starting to look into our industry because it's currently worth about $10 trillion. And maybe 10 years from now, it's going to double. So the IT industry is starting to kind of create more interest in us and seeing that, okay, so if they're not interested in knowledge management and data management, there's that $20 trillion opportunity. Yeah. So in order to be able to produce good XR content, there needs to be that deep comprehension about what is BIM, and then use the BIM tools like Revit in a way that you're producing the virtual representation of the real world, so virtual mock-up of the real world. You're capable of creating all the detailing basically in Revit, and whatever you're modeling is something that in Europe they say that what is modeled is something that is going to be built, and if it's not modeled, it's not going to be built. So they don't really care about the 2D documents. They are just legal documents and something that is more of about the tradition and not about the modern day. And just to cover a little bit about the future of construction, the reliable data is really a hot item in Europe at the moment. It was Skanska that announced last fall that they're done with developing BIM processes. They've done it for 15 years. They have it down. What they are now talking about and thinking about is how is Revit data and Revit attributes machine readable so they can start extracting that data and feeding that to robots and drones, assembly lines. I haven't heard that discussion that much here in the United States. Any questions so far? So, about the Revit practices. Again, about people. Revit is a great platform for team collaboration. It truly is the transoperable platform these days, because you can share everything. You can share the coordinate systems, and you can make sure that everyone is modeling to the right elevations, and you can share the geometry of different building parts and systems, and you can change units on the fly. So if you're working on an international project, you might be using feet here and meters in Europe or somewhere else in the world. So understanding that when you start a Revit project, in the beginning, the designers model with so-called generic objects. Is this a term that you use here in the United States, or is it the European term? Okay, so it is. So the designers have the design intent, and you start the accumulation of BIM data at the beginning of the building life cycle when the project is commissioned. And when your design and engineering model is handed over to the construction companies, we can start then refining that data and start putting in more manufacturer-based specific data. And that way, again, accumulate more accurate data. So eventually, when the building is handed over, we should also be handing over the virtual version of the building with exactly accurate data that represents and is matching with what is actually built. And that way, when the building operations start and the facility management company starts doing their business, they can rely on the data that the designers provided and what we provided, and they can start refining that model data based on how they are operating the building. And they can then do their simulation and analysis about the total performance of the building and start optimizing the building life cycle. How many of you have regular discussions with the facility management companies and how they use BIM? Probably not that many. It's because the building standard, BIM standards and I guess the workflows and the processes are not as standardized here as in Europe. I don't know what the reason is, but in Europe the driver has been that basically everything in Europe was built after the Second World War. So the buildings and the built environment is at the technical life cycle end. So there isn't that much money available in Europe, so you have to be really innovative and adapt quickly to the new tools. And that's why Europeans are so forward with the BIM technologies and all these new tech. There's a lot of sustainability aspects to it. There's a lot of primary energy production aspects to it, and that's why the Europeans are now starting to approach BIM and use of tools like Revit to start building smart cities. So for creating the models for the XR, when I get model content from multiple disciplines, one of the issues that I've run into is that the models are not clean. There's a lot of kind of excess parts or just excess 3D content that is there. So when you're creating your models, please do use the work sets and different kinds of filters to kind of limit out what you're providing for the other authors or other designers and engineers. So clean up misplaced items and random objects and things that are outdated. And if there's overlapping objects, they all just cause a lot of noise that in XR kind of creates a lot of problems because you've all seen a mixed reality headset called the HoloLens. It's a self-contained computer, so it has a limited memory to it. So if the model content that we get and try to create the MR experience from it, that hardware is unable to process that stuff if the models are so kind of not scrubbed enough. So it just causes a lot of extra work for the XR developer to start figuring out what needs to be removed, or are we missing data, or are we missing some important geometry because something needs to be removed in order to HoloLens to be able to contain it. So it basically brings the team back to the original problem that was the interoperability problem back in like 10 years ago when we started developing the IFC file format and all that so that we were able to make sure that all the geometry and all the data that was in BIM was transferred and not left behind, or geometry and 3D content was not lost, or data was not fragmented. So if we are getting model content that is unclean, we go back to the original problem that we tried to solve already 10 years ago with the tools like Revit. One thing that is important is that when you are creating your Revit models, some people sometimes lock their models or limit the access. Please don't do that, or if you do it, make sure that you're not blocking out the important stuff. So that's just basic housekeeping. And from business side of views, consider Revit as the transoperable platform for your entire project team. And that project team should be considered extended outside of your project team in your home company and just considering everyone who is part of the project. So I think that there's a big need for creating standards that everyone adapts to. I wrote a paper about ad hoc BIM libraries maybe 10 years ago almost. And it still kind of remains the problem that if every company comes up with their own BIM standard, there are going to be problems with the naming of the objects or any attribute data that you put into it, because then others might not be able to use their automated systems to extract that data. And if we go back to the machine readability, that only emphasizes how important it is to come up with some kind of standard. So the data needs to be reliable and it needs to be absolutely correct and it needs to be machine readable, so quality data. And as the BIM process goes forward, data accumulates. So the idea is that you all know that there's like one input and multiple outputs from generic model data to manufacturer's specific model data. So people can start doing their simulations and analysis and do all kinds of stuff outside of just the visualization tool. So having the Revit content be accurate is it's the basis for enhancing and enriching the data that we provide and what others provide. So we are creating that transoperable platform and exchanging data, not geometry data. I'd like to start more discussion about using Revit as a data management and knowledge management tool rather than a modeling tool. And being able to use the parametric software that allows multiple users to be on the same platform during the design and engineering phase and during the construction phase of the project, it only enriches the project and creates more business opportunities. And then the technology side of best modeling practices is that when you use the BIM object libraries, if you're able to use object libraries that are overall available for everyone, it's awesome. And please do give feedback for those who author those libraries. And if you create your own libraries, make sure that what you're creating is interoperable with other systems. Not everyone is necessarily using Revit, but they still need to be able to access the content that you're creating. So don't lock it out. And use some kind of standard naming convention. So when things are filtered in XR, I use voice commands to interact in the virtual reality and augmented reality. If I'm not able to use those pre-made scripts that I've created, I'm not able to toggle things on and off in a logical way. And that just causes, again, frustration if I take that model content to site conditions and I tell them that, okay, here's a list of voice commands that you can use, and they wear the HoloLens, for example, and my script is unable to find something because there's a typo or it's just an ad hoc naming convention that someone uses in a random company. So standard naming convention is really important. And when you're creating the 3D content, aim at low polygon count. There's no need to create everything in 3D, even though you're capable of modeling everything in Revit. But kind of keeping in mind what is the significant and meaningful data, the absolute needed minimum that you need to communicate to your stakeholders about the project. And that way, when someone is creating the XR environment, they can create bigger entities and not just focus on a single object or just a single room or half a room or something. They can be looking at the entity and the entire project, because we're not building parts, we are building buildings, and those buildings are part of neighborhoods and cities. So the bigger entity you can look at, the wiser decisions you're making and more educated you are about the project. And yeah, there's a lot of linked content in Revit when there are different disciplines working in the same project. And for some reason that I don't know of, sometimes the linked models don't necessarily export, or they only export parts of it. So I'm guessing that it's probably something to do with the authoring and locking things out and just kind of making sure that something is kept for your own use. So when you're creating the models, make sure that whatever is linked, it's exportable. I think it was more about AutoCAD-based MEP system that was giving me a lot of hard time. The geometries were not exporting completely, and I was missing some connections. So it created a lot of discussion and frustration and consumed a lot of time to solve. Eventually I solved it, but it wasn't that easy. And when creating the exports, keep in mind that the XR experiences are only able to showcase anything that is 3D. So if anything is drawn in lines or kind of created as a drawing, it will not be exported. So keeping in mind that people have access to the meaningful data, and whatever is going to be built is actually modeled, leads to better teamwork and comprehension. So model everything that takes up physical space, even as just generic, some kind of a generic mass or something, so that when people are experiencing the design, they can see that, okay, there's going to be something there. But don't over-model it unless it's something that is going to be that specific. Am I making sense? And Revit has really good materials and textures library. So managing that also advances the XR development. I'm able to remap materials and textures in the gaming engines that I use for creating the MR and all that. But it's much better if the designers and the engineers have already been wise about using the materials and textures in Revit and managing that data. Because then what we are showcasing to our clients, or for the design team and the engineering team or the construction team, it actually makes a difference in understanding if something is made of wood or if it's made of concrete. Because then you're better in comprehending what the final product is going to look like. And that way, there's the quality aspect of things, and people also understand that there's some kind of cost associated to those materials. And it's also a safety feature. So being able to use all that content that you can manage in Revit, do it. Revit is really a sophisticated tool, so everything that you can manage inside Revit applies and adds on to the XR development of things. Any questions? Okay, this is a short one, because for extracting Revit content to XR, depending on are you creating an augmented reality, are you creating a mixed reality, or are you creating virtual reality, you can use just a click on add-ons. They are fairly sophisticated now, and they are good at visualizing your project. Some of them are free, some of them have a little cost to it, but it's made really easy. And you get like decent content out of it, so you can see what the project is going to look like, and maybe you can see some of the Revit metadata, parametrics, and attributes with some of the tools. So that's a really quick and easy way to start using XR as one of your tools. And if you're more advanced and you're willing to learn a little bit of programming, you can prepare your Revit model to be exactly how you like it to be, filter everything, clean it up, manage the materials and textures, and then export what you need for your XR experience. And the file format is already built into Revit. It's the FBX file format. And it's compatible with the gaming tools that are basically Unity or Unreal that are currently used. I use Unity because that's the platform that supports HoloLens, but Unreal is probably more common for architects. It's a little bit easier to use and creates magnificent visualizations. And then you do your own scripts, and you can use the ready-made toolkits that are available for free, and then you just deploy your XR to whatever hardware you want to be. The hardware development and the software development has been really rapid within the past year, so I'm not showing you any of the hardware devices that are currently available because the development speed is so fast. There's no reason to show you something that is going to be old technology by next week, maybe. But they are basically the hardware tools that are coming from the gaming industry, and I'm trying to now kind of guide the hardware and software developers to start developing tools for our industry. So hopefully we're going to be seeing a little bit of change in the future, so we get tools that are usable in, for example, field conditions. The current HoloLens is a little bit tricky to use in field conditions, so hopefully that will change eventually. Any questions about this topic? For field conditions, I mean that you can take a wearable computer or an augmented reality with your smartphone or a tablet, and then you can experience the design in field conditions. So you can see what is going to be built, and you can compare that with what has been built, and just having maybe virtual job walks or constructability reviews or anything that the field teams would need to do in order to prepare. Yeah. Any other questions? So for creating the XR, I mentioned the gaming tools. Fair warning about the gaming tools is that there are a lot of interoperability issues currently because the hardware development and the software development are happening at different speeds. So I've run into a lot of problems that there are tools that are supporting one platform but not the other one, or that the hardware doesn't support certain software versions, And there's a need for programming skills. And those scripts that I'm creating or what I can download from somewhere, they're not necessarily always operable with the newer versions, and it's constantly updating. So it's really kind of, it's hard to explain what the best ways of creating XR currently are, because the software developers, they require a lot of feedback from everyone, from the designers and engineers and general contractors and all that, so they understand better what our industry needs. Because now they've been really kind of depending on the gaming industry developers, and the gaming industry has been really strong in creating these tools, but they're not necessarily applicable for us. When I started the development process that I'm doing, we were looking at sharks that were floating in the air. That's not really helpful for a construction company. So there was a big struggle in the beginning to get anything that was bigger than the size of this stylus for a HoloLens or for any other XR platform. So it was a kind of it was a fast learning curve to figure out how to get the file sizes exported in a way that we could have bigger entities. And big problem was to get the materials and textures out from Revit. Because when you create an FBX export directly from Revit, it doesn't transport or export any of the materials and textures. So I had to basically create a trick to do it. And now there are magnificent tools and softwares available to kind of manipulate the file size of Revit exports. So now the file sizes are not necessarily, or the project sizes are not necessarily the limiting factor anymore. There's the company that I mentioned that I'm going to show the little video about, they can process big data, big quantities of data. So that solution is already kind of, it's making the XR development much faster. And even though now I'm capable of creating projects roughly, probably this building is not that big for my process flow to create an XR, but it's much faster to use the tools that are currently available. So they just need a lot of feedback. And with the gaming engines, the strength is that you can basically develop custom XR experiences. So when comparing with the plug and play tools that are available for experiencing the XR, the plug and play solutions are kind of, you're depending on what the software developer has been able to do, whereas with using the gaming engines, you're more in control, and you can create your own scripts, your own voice commands, your own air tab commands, or hand remote control commands. So it's up to your choice what you want to be focusing on. Any questions so far? And let's move to the example. So this is augmented reality, and this is a video made through iPad from a project at the Pike Place Market waterfront that Sellen finished last fall. And we are in the restaurant space, and you can see that the Revit model is overlaid on the actual reality. So it's easy to align, and you can see that it matches with what has been modeled. And it looks fairly photorealistic. The textures and materials and the geometry is coming from Revit model, and then it was processed with a gaming engine and pushed into a cloud service that we are using with a tablet. And it's all life size. So it's a really good tool for doing job walks or having your client go and experience something on their own, even in like an office environment. So using XR doesn't limit your clients that might be all the way somewhere on the other coast. They can join your meetings in XR as an avatar, or they can choose when and where they want to be experiencing their project. Because what you're seeing, it can be live scale, or it can be scaled into a so-called dollhouse. And whatever is modeled is something that is going to be built, so they can rely on what data you're providing for them. And as the tools develop, I want to see us using the XR more for data management that I was talking about with Revit. That is not only a tool for visualizing the projects, it's also a tool for managing the data. And eventually, we are going to be seeing that when things are manipulated in XR environment, it can be then pushed back to Revit. I'd like to see that development path happen. Any questions about this? Can you repeat? So this was an architectural model that we got from the design company, but we can combine all the disciplines into the same XR experience. And this was the first pilot that we did with this software when the new features came out. So we left out some of the model content just to make sure that we can focus on testing it out. But it turned out to be really cool, so we're showcasing it. Yeah. And so in the gaming engine, when you import your Revit model into it, it's already in live size because everyone is modeling 1-to-1. And in the gaming engine, then you can manipulate the scale. And then you can also create a script that you can use your voice command, for example, to scale it up or down. Because we were projecting it into real world, so it's already a finished project, and whatever was modeled, it was already measured to be the actual product that was going into the project. So again, we are talking about the virtual mock-up, the virtual representation of the real building. So when you're modeling something in Revit, you're creating the virtual mock-up of that building part. And that's why everything matches. Yeah? So it makes sense? Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that's an excellent question. And that was one of the reasons why I learned how to program with Unity, because sometimes we have our construction sites where there is no Wi-Fi connection or mobile broadband. So you can't be necessarily relying on the plug-and-play solutions where you need to have access to a cloud or at least have some kind of a mobile broadband, and you can use a QR code to align things. So I created my own workflow in Unity. So if we went to a completely blank site, that there was nothing there, I would imagine that we're still in some location where I know where I am, and then I can map that location into the gaming engine. And when I create the experience, I already know where to go to in the actual world. And then when I deploy, for example, the HoloLens experience, it lines up at the right location. There are some limitations with the hardware that when you are experiencing with the HoloLens, it starts to drift. There's a little bit of jitter and judder and all kinds of terms that I don't even know what they mean, but it basically means that the model content is misaligned at some point when you walk away from the original anchoring point. So when the hardware reaches the next generation, then we are probably going to see better aligned model content in the XR. So the software is able to support, but the hardware might not. We are talking about really new tech. So there's a lot of scrubbing to do, and a lot of feedback is needed, and a lot of testing. So really good question about that. But yeah, I developed a way to kind of anchor the model when there is no way to anchor it. Okay. More questions about this?